Hi, everyone. So, today in this special discussion, I am delighted to have with me Ibrahim Tencer, a fellow socionist. We go back yonks. And yeah, Ibrahim has been into socionics even longer than I have. One of the veterans, you could say, of the Wikisocion days. And yeah, he's also someone who offers a typing service. He has Sedacology, which is a very active website full of typings of different famous and fictional characters. And more recently, and I say more recent, the last couple of years, I guess, he's been working on Model A2, which is an update to Model A, and I'm delighted to hear more about it from the man himself. So Ibrahim, welcome. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. Absolutely knackered because I've been sleep deprived the last few days. But other than that, excited about this and looking forward to hearing what you have to say about Model A too.
Okay, great. So yeah, Model A2, like it was I initially started working on it like many years ago. It was like I don't know, 2016 maybe and but I've when I was doing that, like the reason well, I don't remember the exact reasons why I was working on this kind of new model, but there were a lot of, problems in socionics that I was grappling with, especially how to define the basic categories, because as I mentioned in my live stream with Trey, the basic definitions of, like, for example, the information elements. There were these very abstract dichotomous definitions, like,
Mm.
TI is external statics of fields, for example,
Yep.
which didn't seem very practical or like, close to how we think about them. But on the other hand, there were these sorts of, like, bags of concepts, like people would say, TI is about rules, it's about structure, it's about,
Yeah.
formal logic and all these things. But it was, though, on that side, it seemed like sort of, disorganized, like, what is the connection between all these concepts? So, Model A2 is maybe not directly related to that, but after I had some ideas about, information flow and these sorts of, like, signed elements. Like, Gulenko, I had read about Model G, Gulenko's Model G, and I sort of based Model A2 on that initially. But later on, I sort of wanted to return to the basics of Model A and define those more clearly before working on Model A2. But a few years ago, I published a new article on Model A2 because I feel like I'm in a better position now to define the a 16 element model that will be a lot more closely related to practice than something like Model G or Model B, which I think are, for me at least, they're still in the speculative
Mm.
concept realm.
And that's something I did notice from listening to your interview with Trey. You've approached this with a great deal of humility. That this is something where it's not the be all and end all yet. It's something still in an open, quite speculative space, and it's more of a launch pad for further discussion, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, so, like, I'm fine saying, Model A2, it's not complete yet. So I'm
Mm,
still working on it. I only published the descriptions for alpha and beta so far. I might
mm,
publish the one for gamma. I've been, it's sort of bare bones right now, I would say, but it's
mm.
it's getting more fleshed out over time, and delta will come later. So yeah, so there's this idea I have about, quadra progression, but it's a new kind of quadra progression where beta comes first, then alpha, then gamma, then delta. So
Yes.
it's not going according to the, what you would think based on how the quadras share elements, which, of course, naturally, alpha would be across from, gamma, and so
Yeah.
beta or delta would come in between. But it's a more linear way of thinking about the quadras.
So just confirm, is that beta? it says beta, alpha, gamma, delta. That it?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Fascinating. Because that also that seems to break with process result.
Well, I mean, I guess you could say that, like, the way Gulenko thinks about it, there's these, rings of, either, supervision or benefit rings, and yeah,
Mm,
they both share process result. And you initially, when I was working on Model A2, I was using the traditional signs, plus minus, in particular
mm,
the Model G signs, because it made a little bit more sense to me to assign them to, positivists and negativists. But
yep.
even then, it was like it was kind of hard to make any sense of what these traits actually mean. Like why should SLI be plus SLI? It's kind of hard
Yep.
to understand how, delta, what I would now call delta SI is more positive than alpha SI. Really, delta is the one that's trying to get rid of unnecessary things and, solve problems, whereas, alpha SI is more about embellishing things and making them more, beautiful or something like that.
Okay. I just but my first thought, just put a pin in that one. But my thought in regards to starting with beta and ending with delta, what I
Mhm.
really liked about that was reading it on your blog article. You're talking about moving from a place of maximal intensity to a place of maximal complexity. And I think you said that part of this was inspired by your Islamic faith. I had a quite another thought running through my head, which is my thinking about entropy and specifically moving from the Big Bang, where there was maximal low entropy, to the eventual heat death of the universe, which would be maximal high entropy. And the idea that there is a linkage there between things being very sort of simple and cohesive to things being quite sort of cool, but also quite sort of complex and yeah, and just there's almost too much complexity for anything to really happen anymore. And I'm thinking, first of all, that seems to align quite well with the idea of entropy. But also, it made me think about you said you don't want to talk about too much, which are the Tensor Minaev dichotomies. Because,
Well,
go on.
I mean, we can talk about them. I'm just saying they're not really something I actively think about. What did you want to say
I've been
about them?
thinking about them a lot. And
Okay.
what I was thinking in terms of, okay, we got at least we go on Wikisocion, it says alpha versus gamma, and it goes beta versus delta. And really, this should be about beta versus delta. Thinking about, okay, what is it that's implicit to every single element that is valued by delta versus every single element that's valued by beta? I'd say is that the beta elements, the beta valued elements, are what I'd say are conclusive. They are increasing the certainty in the in the position of whatever the information is telling you. Whereas the delta valued information I call questionable. It's decreasing the certainty in in the outcome or position of the information that is telling you. And that strikes me that yes, everything about Delta is about humility, a willingness to rethink things, to learn from one's mistakes, to show one's vulnerabilities in terms of one's conscience and all those sorts of complexities and sort of it depends on the situation way of thinking and sort of the messy sincerity of self. Whereas for beta, it's deliberately not messy. It's intense, but it's very much packaged. And it's very much a sense of no, this is the clarity of both my communication and the force of my influence, but also the absoluteness of my understanding of the deeper truth. And I found it interesting that although you coined the mathematical necessity of these extra two dichotomies, I don't recall you going so far as to define them yourself. I find it very interesting that the definition I reach matches what you're talking about in terms of beta moving towards delta in this quadra progression.
Yeah, so okay, so there's the first of all there's, the I am element dichotomies. Okay,
Mm,
so there's, we as we know according to the Raynon math, there's, three basic dichotomies. So there's going to be 8 minus 1 or 7 I am element dichotomies, right?
yep.
So, that's I didn't come up with that idea.
No.
I don't know if you were, yeah. So just to make it clear for the viewers, the tensor Mendeleev dichotomies, whatever you want to call them, they're actually type dichotomies, which overlap with Raynon dichotomies in a certain. Some of them are shared, some are not. So some are new, and they a few of them were discovered like randomly or sort of implicitly discovered by by what's his name, Gut, which was an
Mm,
Eastern socionist, but he didn't
mm,
really name them. He just kind of used them, and I guess Miniev says that he discovered them independently of me. So, but the idea is that these new dichotomies are, for example, like the types that have an alpha element as their first function or as their second function, or the analogous kinds of things, other quadras, or like having an internal or external element in the first position or second position, and etc.
yeah.
Yeah, so there's a connection there. um I'm much less. I'm not really interested in, like, Rainin dichotomies and the also these new dichotomies, just because I think defining things at the type level tends to be sort of thorny, and
Mm.
basically I just view the presence dichotomies as being the visible ones that we see in practice, which is, I think mostly how you see it too, right?
Yeah, I think presence for me is a complex interaction of different dichotomies working together, which leads to a sort of loose rule of thumb, which is I think the presence cube
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, so there's that. But if you're talking solely about I am element dichotomies,
Mm,
like that's a very interesting topic to me. Like that's what I mean, I think more about it. I don't think I think more about the I am elements individually,
mm,
just because that's I find the easiest way to think of them. And
mm,
also I mean, it's more closely related to practice, where we just say, oh, this is TI, this is NE, or whatever it is, and we don't because we're associating, the IM elements with, behaviors or things like that. But yeah, I mean, but the dichotomies of IMEs, like, Trey and I touched on that a bit in our discussion. And I did mention it in my aspects article on my blog, about, well, technically they weren't, they were what I call semi dichotomies. That I talked more about, like, for example, what SI and NE have in common, and
mm.
what FI and TE have in common.
Yep.
I didn't talk so much about the full quadra dichotomies, because there's sort of this, there's some issues with figuring out what irrational and rational elements have in common. The when you have to, put the two together in a quadra. That's, I think that's a very hard question. It has to do with, blocking, and how we explain, like, if you can understand blocking, I think basically
Yep.
that explains everything about Model A, because you have this, like, sort of weird structure where, like, TI can only be blocked with NE or SE. So
Yep.
that's what the crux of it. And I like your idea of, conclusive versus questionable. I haven't thought about it so much to, like, sort of connect it with my own ideas, but yeah, that's a good place to start from, I think.
Thank you. I also, I mean, the other one is, which I think is potentially more contentious, at least it was with Ryan Petrello, was unifying dividing, which
Ah.
I put to where unifying would be the alpha valued elements and dividing would be the gamma valued elements. And the idea that implicit to the unifying ones, they're trying to bring, they're trying to reduce the space between the various elements. They're trying to bring things together, whereas well, information points bring together, whereas dividing, it's trying to separate things apart, which, if valued, I'd say leads to the independence leaning, which seems to govern much of Gamma, versus the almost collectivist, everyone in it together, horizontal collectivism approach of Alpha. And I guess there was a difficulty there of this belief that NE is very much diverging. And I guess if you view it as someone who's interested in new ideas, they go to this idea, they're interested in that idea, which you could say that hopping around might be considered to be diverging rather than converging. But I'd say implicit in it is they want to have all the possibilities together, and the idea that the possibilities can inhabit the same space because there's no the nature of implicit, no, not implicit, sorry, yeah, implicit information that is also expansive, extroverted. It doesn't emit any repulsive force on anything else around it. If it's explicit, if it's physical, it actually pushes things away. We know that. If you put a coin into water, the water gets pushed up. So we know that physical objects of material extension push themselves out the way. And we know that logically, two facts can't really inhabit the same space either. There's a question of either contradiction or superfluousness or things not working as well. Whereas when it comes to intuition and ethics, the implicit information, there's no demand on them not occupying the same space. All possibilities can be inherent in a single seed. And and same thing with emotions. You can be filled with infinite emotions, almost. And it's that idea which they would think, no, actually, it is unifying. And he is unifying, and is unifying, which that sort of it that was perhaps easier for people to accept. But that SE is dividing. It has a pushing out force. It's saying this is what I want, and it competes with what you want, and that sort of thing. Um,
Yeah, yeah, I agree a lot with that actually. And I described the alpha quadra in general, or the alpha elements in Model A2 as the ones that yeah, they include people or things. It's inclusion. It's the quadra of inclusion. So yeah,
yes,
I agree with that. Oh, I think your camera turned off.
my camera. What was my? Oh,
Yeah.
it's. Hang on a second. Let me get that right. Sorry. Okay, let me try again. There we go.
Okay. So yeah, so I definitely think that that works. I was thinking of them, more in terms of these what do you call it? I call them quadra elements now. Signed elements basically.
Yes.
That's my name for them because alpha, I was saying like alpha FE is about including people, alpha NE is about generating new ideas, and yes, you're right. NE adds to what exists already. So that's definitely fits in with how I see it. And the way, yeah, and TI is alpha TI is about generalizing information. So it's about including more, possible worlds basically in your model. And
Mm,
SI, alpha SI is, well, the link there is maybe not so clear to me, but it's basically about making the environment more suitable to, I guess, more people, something like that. Um, and also, I should say that actually about the back to the inclusive, I mean, back to the conclusive, questionable idea. I actually have described beta in the past as being, yeah, seeking greater certainty about or greater, but I think I was talking more about NI and TI, how that works together, because they're both
yes.
trying to limit
Yes.
information and like focus on what is like the right way. And whereas, NE and TE are they're trying to expand information and get more perspectives and include, more different kinds of ideas. Yeah.
And that is those sorts of contrasts. I find another thing I've been thinking a lot about, and I know you questioned why do we need this when I posited to you the idea of the tournaments, and the tournaments idea. It's not okay. We need to group all these types together because they're very alike. It's more that the thing which they're sharing in are their points of conflict, and that their clashes are most intense. NETE versus NITI, which I'd say are best represented by the the delta extroverts and the beta introverts, are I say is very much that fundamental disagreement over the nature of truth, whether where the beta introverts NIT are the ones being pushed because that's their valued inert functions and obvious functions, sorry, bold functions. That means that they're very much about the absoluteness of truth is about absoluteness. It is not. It is you're not to question this. It is absolutely the case. Or that I've put in so much thought and time to reach this. There's no room for questioning anymore. It is absolutely the case. Or it's simply revealed. It's almost a matter of revelation, and almost the faith is what makes it so true to the person. Whereas NETE, I'd say, is very much the opposite of this. It's there isn't an absolute truth. Everything kind of depends on the situation. And the types which are most likely to reject any kind of generalizing conclusion and need to explain things in terms of example after example after example, and sort of, especially when they almost miss the underlying point, or the i.e. avoid any kind of rule. I think that is where NET comes in. I also say societally, I think many issues we're facing right now are being in the grip of NE and TE. That sort of positivism of, everything depends on the situation, everything becomes relative. There is no underlying truth, which I think is what makes the more sort of well, the beta introvertim aspect very appealing to people as a countervailing force.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think a lot of issues in society are from an excess of like extroversion, there's a lot of like materialism, it could be related
Mm,
to SE and
mm,
yeah, definitely like yeah, like sort of moral relativism of any so kinds of things like that. And unless we're seeing a lot of the more the cohesion of society is sort of breaking down more, with less emphasis on personal relationships and more
yes,
meaningful deep kinds of connections.
we're experiencing the heat death of society, a
Maybe.
maximal entropy.
Yeah, yeah, society is definitely very complex now, which I guess doesn't bode well if you believe in the end of it.
Well, I guess that's where we start to see the Dark Age, which I guess is coming on, and then we'll see, that sort of time of inventiveness which happened in the European Dark Age, which people actually had better lifespans because the sort of the tyrannical excesses had gone. People started becoming more inventive, more communal, and sort of communities almost came back quite a lot in the European Dark Age. I know the Islamic world they had things quite a bit better at that time, but it's yeah. I think this is part of that natural cycle.
Yeah, maybe. So did you have any other question? I don't want to
Well,
like, totally rehash my discussion with Trey. I just, but anything you want to talk
no,
about is
I'm
fine.
in another point you talked about is Alpha SI. Okay, people know that I am a 16 element skeptic. I'm more inclined to view things in terms of the combinations of elements coming together. But, so if when I think of Alpha SI, I guess there's a choice. Do I look at Alpha SI in terms of SI plus FE? Or am I looking at Alpha SI in terms of SI plus TI? And I guess it's a question of, is this a question of it as an air of strength and capability? Or is it as an area of which values are being pushed about the person? And I guess when I think of pluses and minuses, I know you've now relegated those two behind you, but I'm thinking if I were to attach a plus and a minus to things, I'd probably go with positivism, negativism, in that I'd see the SLI as the plus and the SEI as the minus. But why would I do that? when I'm thinking about an SEI, I'm actually thinking less in terms of embellishments. If I think of my relationship with my wife, and maybe that's anecdotal, but I'm thinking, okay, how would this make sense in terms of an ILE SEI relationship? Usually, I come up with a proposal, and my wife is like, I'm not sure people are going to find that very comfortable. And I'm actually surprisingly, I'm very receptive to that rather than, no, it's impossible, it's never going to work. If someone tells me something's never going to work, I resist that very much. But if someone tells me, oh, I don't think people are going to like that, it makes me think, okay, maybe this idea people aren't comfortable enough with. Maybe this idea will lead to um, bad negative atmosphere, which is not what I want to do. And I found myself defaulting to that quite a bit. And so I'm wondering what characterizes the SEI, especially in helping an ILE and in conflicting with an LIE or SEE. And I think it's that when an LIE and SEE, when they go into an environment with their SETE, they are rapidly shaking things up. They are trying to ruthlessly increase and optimize how things are operating in order to achieve their quite concrete goals of material success. They are constantly shifting the goalposts of when things have been accomplished. They're never quite satisfied. But I've accomplished this. They don't then sit on their laurels. Like, no, okay, how can I push things further? How can I learn from this to now take things to the next step, to make things more effective, to be more successful? I'd imagine that as being a sort of positivism. Whereas when I think of an SEI and the LII, it's more, what are you doing? You're bastardizing my model. You're making this so uncomfortable. You're putting me out of my nice comfort zone of familiarity, and everything symmetrically fits together and makes sense, and it's nice, and I've done it, and I've done it a lot of times more for the SEI, and I'm used to it, and now you're just bombarding me with all this stuff. I don't want this. I want it to be the system to be either sort of pure and theoretically pure or comfortable and fitting together in its elegant simplicity. And when I think of that sort of dynamic, I'm thinking of a positivism versus negativism. But the negativism is it more coming from the SEI? I'm not sure if that's the case for the SLI, and I think instead for an SLI, what's going on there? SLIs are very messy, sincere people when they and EIIs, I think actually as well. When you get to know them, it's more sense of look, this is who I am. I'm letting it all hang out, not because it's all okay, and I don't want a non-judgmental space because this is simply a question of who I am. I'm a work in progress, and these are all the complexities of as to who I am. And I thought this that day, and I thought that day, and now I'm upset about this, but I'm also a bit about this. And these are sort of the nuances and the complexities of how I feel in my space and in my actions. And I'm thinking, well, is that a negativism or is that a positivism? Because it strikes me as very authentic in a way that ironically doesn't travel well and isn't communicated well and is actually quite easily misunderstood in some sort of public facing celebrity marketed format. But it actually has a sort of a self-affirming richness, which I'd almost attribute to a plus rather than a minus.
All right, well, I mean, I don't know, like the idea that somehow like it makes sense that SI does some, filtering or, limiting the sort of exuberance of NE, but I'm not really sure I agree that that would apply more to, SEI, ILE than SLI, IEE. It seems to me that an SLI is going to be, restraining an IEE in sort of a similar way. Maybe, I mean, not exactly in the way that you said, but and basically my problem is like I don't really like, if you take a category and like, like the Reinin dichotomies and try to figure out what it means, that approach usually does not work. That's just my experience, in researching these kinds of things. And what works better is to look at, the individual categories, like the individual IM elements or types, things like that, and sort of start from there, start from what you know, instead of trying to assign something to this, abstract category that may or may not mean anything, much less
Hmm.
trying to interpret, whatever Rainin or Glencoe or whoever it was that came up with this name decided to call it. Like
Yeah,
I'm not,
yeah.
I don't think we have to, figure out what makes SLI positivist, or, SLI is like delta SI. Why is it the leading function of a quote unquote positivist type? Like that's not to me, that's not even really like a real question. That's, it's a made up question.
I think that there's certainly wisdom in not just taking what Glencoe said and trying to force that to fit. And that's not what I'm trying to do either. For me, it's coming from a position, as you know, I've for most of my time as sociologics, I hadn't had much to do with any of the more complicated brain and dichotomies. So,
Mhm.
but there was a point when I thought to myself, I'm not satisfied with this. I'm not satisfied with just saying I'm not having anything to do with this. There is a, regardless of the actual definitions, mathematically speaking, they are there, and and as long as they're defined correctly, however they're defined, they should be able to reveal something to us in terms of how certain types are similar and how other types are different from those similar types. And that could be something which is valuable to the understanding of them. And so I went into it with a exploratory spirit, but with a desire to come to some kind of understanding as a result of it. So I don't even necessarily use positivist and negativist. I use that here because I know I don't want to bombard you with unfamiliar terminology. But
Okay.
I'm inclined to think that rather than calling it positive and negative, it's not necessarily about optimism or negativism. I think it's more about affirming or denying a certain a certain virtue. And I say a virtue because it's linked to what is inert and what's contact, what I'd say is stubborn or flexible, which I think people have, but that seems to have caught on a little bit with people. And that, okay, where is an SLI stubborn? It's not in their logic, it's in their sensation, and it's in their ethics. And okay, it's interesting that what's stubborn is also, and what is also bold, so I say has a lot of energy directed at it for the type, is also valued. It suggests to me that these are the things, the leading and the mobilizing, that the type is trying to push. In which case, it's quite important to the type that those things are being pushed, and they see themselves as the person who is the pusher of it in some way, in their society or in their personal life, depending on quadra values. What I think is interesting in that is okay. So, what is the SLI pushing? And what is also likewise, whatever they're pushing, they're activated. The EII must be pushing. I thought, okay, it seems to me to be authenticity because the EIIs and the SLIs are the worst self marketers, the least interested in fame, in celebrity, in making their big mark on everyone around, on everyone who they don't know, the most inclined to lead a very localized, personal relationships oriented life where it's about doing what is comfortable to them. And it seems to me that is something which is sort of self-affirming. Whereas when I think of the what was called negativist, I'd say it's more denying, is that the same virtue is in a way approached almost like similar to say an Enneagram, say the counterphobic six. There's sort of a contradictory relationship with it. When I think of the beta extroverts, they also talk a lot about authenticity, about people being fake and that sort of thing. They are also stubborn in the sensation and in the ethics, but they have totally different values around the sensation and the ethics. But despite the fact they call things out as being fake, we also often think that these are the types that are most inclined to be involved in becoming celebrities, making their mark, becoming famous, having street cred, and looking more deeply, say in EIE, their sense of whether they actually matter or not, or even are real or not, is directly proportional to how known they are and how much of a mark they've been able to leave on the public consciousness. In fact, they almost don't exist themselves until they are known by other people. And when they feel something, such as rage or upset, they have to legitimize it by rallying to other people to get them to feel the way that they are feeling. By doing that, suddenly it becomes real.
Yeah, so the delta introvert elements, Fi and Si, yeah, they're both about this kind of like integrity or keeping things the same sort of. They're both about what's local and not like, something like abstract or far away, I guess. That's a commonality I would see there. And yeah, the beta extrovert elements, they're about manifesting the self externally
Mm.
somehow in the world to other people as opposed to just kind of doing your own thing, wherever you are, making more of a it's usually bigger on a bigger scale or something like that. But
Yes.
uh but I mean I don't know because like IEIs also talk a lot about you know what 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 feels authentic or not, so I'm not totally sure it's
Yeah.
like really about the reign and dichotomy.
Well, whereas an I'd say they do like to talk about authenticity. That they're less likely to say that thing is fake, that thing is not fake, or they're more inclined to think this thing is not true, and this thing is relates to a deeper truth, and they see their role. And I think it's particularly it's less about even the values themselves. It's the role they play in bringing about those values. And I think that it's the idea that an IEI, sure, will look to someone and say, this is who you really are, and this is who you're meant to become. And I think that's that engagement in the introverted intuition and with supporting introverted, well, I say, demonstrated introverted ethics. But they see themselves as the truth bringer, the revealer of the underlying truth, the revelator, rather than themselves being this beacon of influence, of knownness to everyone else around them. They can they don't quite move from that to an aspiration where they have to be front and center and being the influencer.
I'm not really sure what the connection there is between
The, well,
you know
the connection, I'd say when it comes to Nai, authenticity is less of a sticking point with them, less the thing which they're complaining about with others, and more a question of, okay, this is what I feel is deeply true, and it's very difficult to change the mind of an AI. It's almost intellectual in terms of being their sticking point, rather than the question of who is real and who is not. I get the sense that the AI quite quickly can pick up what is real and what is authentic and what is not, and treats that as more water under the bridge. I think they're flexible, certainly in regards to their ethics. They blend both introverted ethics and extroverted ethics, with the extroverted ethics being the valued part, the introverted ethics being the not valued but very strong, capable, supporting part, background part. And so an I think, gets a very clear measure of someone, is far less likely to feel, I think, confused about the nature of someone, and is more likely to pick up and handle information without any kind of stressor because it's an air of fluidity to them, but also an air of strength.
okay, but why does that mean that the IEI is more unlike the delta introverts in this way
Well, I think the
then?
delta introverts, they are stubborn in their ethics and also stubborn in their sensation. So when it comes to the ethics part, I'd say that when you're stubborn in your ethics, it means that who you are, how you behave, how people are meant to behave, how we relate to and feel about others, that all has to happen on our terms, not on anyone else's terms. And we're not going to relinquish that to someone else. Whereas an I think, is quite willing to actually leave that to the SLE to decide, where the II supports them in that and helps to guide them in that without taking it away from the SLEs to define. And for them, very much in favor of the extroverted ethics and completely ignoring and overlooking the introverted ethics.
Yeah, I mean that kind of makes sense. Like, yeah, I mean you've been talking about, like I like the stubborn, flexible idea. That makes sense
Mm,
to me, but it's just kind of still it's just a little abstract, when you sort of group these, two very opposite kinds of types together. What I would call, say 4P-FI and
mm,
1P-FI, or 4P-FE and
mm.
1P-FE, which are, sort of the same thing. But yeah, I'm just not really sure where to go with that, other than saying this is something they're stubborn about.
Well, I think maybe it's also useful then to look at, well, I guess it would be a reigning dichotomy. It's one of the easier ones rather than the very sort of complicated ones where you don't even know where you stand with them. Um, which I think is, what does it mean to be stubborn in ethics? Now, I know that was called being a constructivist, which didn't make much sense to me at all. Um,
Mhm.
I'm inclined to think I call it being contrarian, where the contrarian types are the ones more likely to stick out like a sore thumb in social engagements, either because they're trying to rewrite the social mores for themselves, like an EIE or even a sort of a wannabe with an SLE or even an ILE, or they're just, no, this is where I how I feel about it. I'm just not clubbable. But equally, it applies to the introverted ethics side, where they're very much deciding on their personal attitudes, and they're not going to have that shaped by any sort of group confluence. The alternative would be, instead of contrarian, obstinate, which is where we see that in IIs, also SEIs. I think Peter's complained about it a number of times, where you'll go through all the facts with them, you'll show them how it works, and then the next day it's like the conversation was never had. Because even though they can appear quite diplomatic, and this is the thing, IIs are very good at being very socially diplomatic, adapting to the person they're speaking to, and making you think that they agree with you. They never said they agree with you, but they make you feel like they agree with you. And really, you've not changed their mind. You're never going to change their mind. And that's the obstinate, there's a stubborn logic under it. And it also leads me back to saying, okay, why don't I not focus so much on people being authentic or not and calling people fake? Because instead they are the diplomatic ones, far more diplomatic, I'd say, than an EIE or an SLE. Even an LSI, I'd say, actually can be quite diplomatic, more so than SLE and EIE, although without the skill set for that actually to pay off. I think of an LSI, unless it's about what they believe in, where they're far less able than the IEI to make you think they agree with you and actually don't. They are socially adaptive. They do take someone else's lead in terms of what the mood is, and they'll actually warm up to the mood around. They just don't have the skill in order to actually wield that with any kind of will or purpose. But they are adaptive to it, which I think is the other side of being obstinate, that you are then socially adaptive. Whereas if you're contrarian, you're more intellectually adaptive, and you can quite. Whereas you want to set a sense of what your style is, what you're about, how people are perceiving you, how you're coming across. You do dilute your introverted logic with extroverted logic, or vice versa. You you do take other people's suggestions in terms of how things are going to work, how it's meant to fit together, and can imbibe that to yourself, whether with a certain amount of mastery and confidence if it's strong, or in a sense of dependence and needing it from the other person if it's weak.
I don't know. I think maybe those things are better explained using other categories. Like it doesn't really make
Hmm.
sense to me why an LIE would not be what was it called? Contrarian. Like are they it seems to me that if you're
Oh,
stubborn about what you think, then that's also going to lead to a certain amount of stubbornness socially too. Like I mean, I think, LSI is okay, sure, they're maybe they're not gonna determine what the group is sort of doing socially, but they can also be uh sort of disruptive at times, because they do value SE and LIEs. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, they have some FE, so they're going to be sort of going along with the group atmosphere sometimes, but they can be quite disruptive of it too. And then it's like, SLI, are they really trying to be contrarian? That doesn't make sense to me.
well, if you take the LIE as an example, I frequently I find with LIEs, sure, they're not interested in everyone liking them. They don't value extroverted ethics, but they're nevertheless socially adaptive. They're thinking, okay, I need to be careful in terms of how I come across, because if I come across a way which is disadvantageous, that's going to affect me and what I actually want to achieve for myself. It's going to affect my prospects. I've known I know LIEs, for instance, who are socionists, very capable socionists, who nonetheless do not want their name to be attached to what they do because they feel that could affect their job prospects. And they use a moniker for that very reason because they're very okay. I know this field. I'm good at what I do. I also know that people are not going to respond well to that. So I'm going to they are socially adapted, but in terms of managing risk, because it's not valued, it's not particularly strong, but it has enough. It still is bold and it's flexible. Or I say a role function, and I don't find it
I
with
don't,
ILIs.
well, I don't know. I mean, LIEs could be sort of okay at, managing their image, but I think a lot of them are certainly not, and
No,
people tend to dislike them
they're
anyways.
not. They're not. I'm not saying they're great at managing their image, but if we look, for
Okay.
instance, okay, do we agree on Jeff Bezos as an LIE?
Yeah, I think most likely, yeah.
Right. You go on Jeff Bezos's social media. It is safe and boring. Really, really safe and boring. All the things you expect of some sort of CEO or some sort of business to do, where it's like he does not care about what's actually being said on there. He just wants to make sure it doesn't cause any problems. And in that respect, it is still unvalued, but still a social adaptation. Meanwhile, if you look at Elon Musk, whom I think is an ILE rather than LI, I know there's disagreement over this. I'd
Mm.
say he's definitely contrarian. And okay, but the point is we disagree over his typing. Fair
Yeah,
enough.
I think he's LIE, so that would just prove my point in that
Right.
case.
I would have thought I would have said he's ILE because there's a
Okay.
sense of okay, this is who I am, this is what I'm about, and I want people to know it, and I'll get upset if it's then rejected. And don't doubt your vibe. We actually composed a song saying "Don't doubt your vibe" because it's true, and
I
it's
I
yeah.
don't know how you can type him as an SI valuing type. That makes no sense to me
Okay,
whatsoever.
he okay on the basis of on the basis of what I'm talking about the ethics. If we were to go into SI, if we could reach a compromise of beta or some sort of beta extrovert, it would still work. But the point is, okay, I think his introverted sensation is something which he tortures himself over a lot. When he's cried because of his need to feed his baby. And when he talks about a relationship where he just wants someone next to him in bed when he comes home. and it's a sense of, okay, this is a part of him which he has not allowed himself to be fulfilled in, but it hurts him nonetheless. And it seems to show up in when he talks about his private life, even though he doesn't then actually pay attention or look after it.
But I mean, Elon Musk, first of all, he's extremely single-minded. Like he's a
Hmm.
he's a total workaholic. Like he did that, people say he not
No, no,
only
no,
is
I'm a
he
workaholic.
working, okay, well, okay,
I
but
am
he
okay. I don't go to sleep much
okay,
at all.
but not only is he working constantly, he's
Yes.
working on things that are all about his one big project, which is like going to Mars. And people have, talked about how, his different projects are sort of like, in service of that goal. And to I can't remember the examples now, but yeah, I think he also, I think, ILEs can be hardworking, but I don't think they totally neglect their health and things like that just for the sake of work like he does. And also like yeah, he's just an extremely disruptive person, as you can see on his various Twitter rants about
Oh,
things
he,
I don't-
he does troll. He does end up causing disruption. I do agree with that. I don't think he has any capability with that disruption. I also think there's a sense of when he engages in that disruption, he's trying to bring together the collective. The idea of approaching Twitter as a public resource and making it into a public resource for all to benefit from in sort of an environment of open and free speech. It thinks, I think he thinks more in terms of what is the service to society? How can I unlock this thing for all of humanity to enjoy and take part in? And yes, the single-mindedness part of it. I've When I speak to other LIEs, typically they don't have that same single-mindedness. If anything, what they seem to show to me is a sense of, okay, I'm interested in my goals and where it's going. But the introverted intuition is not in the driving seat, it's the extroverted logic. How am I going to do this? How am I going to be successful? And what is that leading to? And the looking at what it's leading to as a means to inform the effectiveness of what they're doing, rather than the big idea in and of itself is the thing they're always striving towards. So you could say maybe Musk is an ILI rather than an LIE. And I think that could actually fit better in terms of the stubbornness and the flexibility. The, the point I'd make though is that when it comes to an ILE, well, look at me. My focus on socionics, there aren't that many people who dedicated as much of what they do and their interest towards socionics as me. I went into business psychology because I was very interested in it eventually being a means to helping with socionics, to unlocking this resource for everyone to benefit from. And I think it goes back to the other dichotomy of stubbornness flexibility, which is what I call, instead of tactical strategic, 'cause I think that's the opposite of true, it is, I call it determined versus exacting, where even the extroverted intuition valuing ones, they set their scope of possibility on their own terms, and it's not to be affected by other people. So an ILE will not be dissuaded from pursuing possibilities, keeping things open. The amount of times we said, "Oh, but I think this is possible," and you said, "No, no, I don't think it is possible," and it's that sort of thing where I will not be dissuaded from opening something up and looking at it, because I think it can be possible and it can lead to something really, really, really good. I think the same way for an ILI or an ESI, LSI, they, especially an ESI or ILI, their default is to say no to things. It's very hard to persuade them to actually agree and allow these new possibilities into their life. They need a very good reason to say yes to it, and it has to be on their terms. But I think the further extension of this is that when an ILE or an IEE or even an LSE or an well, I think less so LSE and ESC because of the total lack of introverted intuition. But when an ILE and an IEE are involved, when they find an idea that they feel holds many other ideas, many other possibilities within it, that will open up a whole new realm of potential. I can see themselves fixating on and dedicating themselves to that idea. That's the way I've seen socionics. It is the ultimate unlocker of new potential in terms of how we relate to each other, how we understand people. I can see Musk doing the same thing in terms of the move to Mars and opening up interplanetary travel. And in doing that, he's exploring all sorts of other things. Whether it comes to the when it comes to the mining, the boring company, or it comes to the brain chips, or it comes to harnessing solar energy, or it comes to the electric cars. He seems to dedicate himself to one grand idea which will lead to many other ideas, but also despite that also gets very distracted in other ideas, as I also find myself getting distracted, such as my whole political misadventure. And I think this is this strikes me as a phenomenon which makes sense, where the extrovert intuition is still valued. It's not that he's not valuing extrovert intuition, it's that he's very stubborn about the scope and it's not for other people to decide, and that the extra edition is still an area of strength, but also an area of value. And he's found this one big idea which holds more other ideas and more other possibilities. The sheer number of technologies and developments in science that will be required in order to get to Mars and everything within that. It's like a super seed. The idea of a seed holding infinite possibility. It's a super seed. And socionics is a super seed as well.
Yeah, I just don't. I think you're inferring a lot of motivations there. Like, to me, getting people interested in socionics is like way more open-ended than,
Mm.
building a rocket and going to Mars. Like that's something very active and in the real world. And I don't know of anywhere where he's framed it as something being something like to, open possibilities for humanity or whatever. And even the Twitter thing, like he bought I do not remember him talking about it in these terms, in terms of like, opening up some resource for humanity. No,
Oh,
what he was
I saw him
talking
do it.
about,
Yeah.
well, that's what I remember is he was talking about limitations on speech, and he didn't like that he felt it was too oppressive before, and that he felt like, he was being censored or something in that. Maybe not in so many words, but that was the sense I got from how he talked about it. So I don't see it as
Okay.
a fundamentally positive, potential oriented kind of way of thinking about it.
I think we should move to a different topic, because where I think there if there is value in such a debate, it's one where we
Right.
can go through all the information and bring it out rather than
Sure.
talk about what we think we remember, both on my part and on your part. I think it's much
Right.
better if we put a pin in that one.
Okay.
Let's talk about more in terms of Model A2.
Okay.
The so you've written alpha, the alpha elements, you've written the beta elements.
Mhm.
What are your, rather than rehash what you talked about on Trey's interview, I'd be interested to know where you see things going in terms of the gamma elements and the delta elements.
Okay. Actually, I'm gonna go to the bathroom first, and then I'll
Go
come
ahead.
back in a minute. Hey,
Hello, hello, hello.
okay, so let me pull up my notes just so I
Hmm. Would you like to share
uh,
screen?
no, that's all right.
All right.
I'll just do this. Okay, yeah, so I've written out the alpha and beta quadras in the newest article on Model A2, which is called The Essence of the Quadras.
Mm,
And yeah, so I in the article, basically just to give an overview first, I was talking about, these quadra elements, as I called them, which are my version of the signed element, and I attempted to describe also the, general features of the quadras themselves, what is their essence. And yeah, so I described basically beta as being about a message. It's the quadra of the message, and it's you're where you're conveying some information that has an impact on the world or other people, and alpha is the quadra of inclusion. It's about making the your situation or community like more favorable to more people, and making sure everyone's needs are taken care of.
mm.
And so gamma is I see it as the quadra of sort of can say arrival or reaching some goal. It's about personal striving through action, and towards something that's you know different from how things are now, and sort of rejecting whatever is present. It's gamma is a very it's the most negative quadrant, the most rejecting. Like you talked about, we talked about joining versus separating. Yeah, that's I
Yes.
think definitely one way to look at it. Alpha versus gamma,
Mm,
or you could say gathering versus distinguishing. That's another way to look at it,
yes. Yes.
because alpha is trying to, look at the commonalities between things, the general, like, theories, or, uh, what people have in common, and can sort of, be on good, how they can be on better terms with one another. And gamma is looking to filter out, the bad ideas and bad people. So that's,
Yes. Yes.
yeah. So I think we agree on that. And,
Yes.
so yeah, gamma FI is the one that's basically filtering out the bad people, and it's doing that sort of to protect yourself, and from the effects these people might have on you. It's sometimes people talk about gamma independence, which means sort of being well, I guess that might have more to do with SE, but it's basically the reason you need to filter out bad people is they could hurt you. They could, and that's why gammas are sort of skeptical about people's motivations, and they try to, characterize people sometimes hastily. And what else can I say about this? So it's yeah, it also means, like, guarding personal information. You don't want to let on too much about yourself, because that could be used against you. And that's opposite of the FE approach, which is to sort of, just express yourself freely, like alphas tend to do, and not worry too much about how people might use information against you. So yeah, so that's the FI, and
Hmm.
Gamma SE. So Gamma SE is like about this striving and personal effort, putting it. It's about action, basically.
Yes.
Whereas Beta SE is it's about having an impact using communication, and like how you either how you communicate, or literally just commanding people to do things. That's how I see like SLE is SE. Instead, Gamma SE is about using your own personal effort to achieve a goal, or not necessarily a goal, but just to move forward. and improve things and improve yourself possibly too. So um what else? So yeah, like gamma ni is the one I see that's the most purely negative. It's about eliminating a possibility, and as opposed to, beta ni is somewhat more positive in that it's sort of like generating this ideal or dream, some sort of fantasy, or like, or some idea of a like what you want your life to be.
Yeah.
Instead of gamma ni, it's more looking at existing ideas and saying, well, no, this one's stupid, or it's wrong, or it's not supported in some way, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
um, so yeah, so it's a little more realistic in that it's not, coming up with some possibly, unrealistic idea or ideal, that beta and I would. Um, so yeah, so there's, I guess, yeah, that you can sort of see how that even that kind of like restraining thing you were talking about before, technically, when you're saying, don't do this, you're using ni. Like, yeah, I guess, well, would it be beta ni or gamma ni? It kind of depends, I guess, but or I'm not sure I would have a definite answer to that. But so yeah, so and finally gamma te, I see as being about progress. I don't think you used this word earlier, but I think you were sort of reaching for it. Yeah, how LIEs, they're, not just looking to go towards a fixed goal necessarily. They're trying to, push forward and, continue to improve things, continually. So yeah, I think progress is a good word for that. So the difference between gamma TE and delta TE is that delta TE is like it's trying, instead of going towards a distant goal, it's trying to return things to equilibrium. So like, if you're the stereotype of, delta STs is like, they're fixing cars, like some sort of gadget, right? So it's when you're fixing something, you're trying to return it back to a good condition. You have this way that it normally is, or that, like
Mm.
really anything, is like, if you have clothes, or or your health, those things are normally in a pretty good state, but they might sort of get knocked off of equilibrium, or have, like, you might get a hole in your shirt that you need to fix. That's delta TE. um and I guess I can go into delta now. I don't see my notes on it, but yeah, so delta SI is sort of linked to that, because it is, I see it as the equilibrium state. It's a little bit, I see it as more passive than alpha SI, like I was talking about earlier. Basically, delta SI it's kind of special in that it doesn't really do anything unless there's a problem. It's what I would say is like purely reactive, or responsive to problems that arise, rather than, looking to, make something that's somewhat new, or embellishing what exists, like alpha SI. And so okay, so that's TE and SI. So delta NE is, I haven't thought about this one so much lately, but the what I the way I saw it before is that um, essentially it's about different perspectives. I still think this is right. IEE is they're interested in, talking to different people, and like, maybe learning new languages, traveling. These are kind of their typical domains, and they do this in order to, get information about other people's perspectives. They're or in something like, intellectual learning, just gathering a lot of information. And yeah, that's how I see that. And I guess the difference with alpha NE is, alpha NEI, like I was saying before, it's like sort of about playing around with different categories and exposing the potential within them. I guess you could say, or yeah, it's I don't know if I have a very clear way of expressing that right now.
I
Did you have any
think you,
questions?
I think just an observation. I think you're a lot tighter and clearer of gamma than you are with delta.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I think because you thought about you thought more about gamma it seems, and you're moving on to delta now a bit more now, but less
Right.
than you have for gamma. I'm thinking one of the differences I see is I think you see very clearly in gamma the leading and the mobilizing playing a sort of role here, and that's coming through very cleanly and clearly. When it comes to delta, it feels more in the ego block rather than
Mhm.
reaching into the mobilizing. And I'm thinking, okay, we talked before, just in this conversation about conclusive, questionable, and also unifying, dividing. You could see the unifying, dividing showing up when you speak of SE and of SE, gamma SE, gamma TE, but also it's very much gamma NI, gamma FI. I'd say the questionable I think if gets worked into when you're talking about delta, I think that will help. That will bring about that similar level of clarity. There's something there about Fi where it's delta, unlike when it's gamma. The gamma, yeah, I don't like this person, right? I know who I am versus that person is not like me. That person is I don't like what that is. I want to keep that a distance from myself. Whereas for the delta, it is the soul searching confessional. Who am I? What do I feel about this? What does that mean, and how does that and what could that person be thinking in that sort of way? And this sense of okay, there are many different interpretations here, and I'm trying to go through and search out these interpretations and all these complications. He loves that person, but also he really doesn't like that person. And he even though he really likes her because of this thing, he also treats her in that sort of way, and that sort of complexities which you can't easily portray it for people to pick up and carry. It's not easy to transmit because it's so laden with integrity rather than clarity. And as a result, it's messy. It doesn't travel well. You have to really get to know the person and in all the shades to really get an appreciation of what they're feeling and why. I think that questionable aspect, rather conclusive aspect, for Delta FI should work. And when it comes to TE, I think you immediately reach for SI in proximity to E, the idea of storing the equilibrium side. But I'm wondering, okay, how do we blend it more with NE? And this
Mhm.
idea of, okay, TE is getting across the differentness of situations, how one situation is totally different to another situation, and that there are complexities and there are no absolutes here. Again, it depends on the situation, and you have to go to the situation and experience it and learn about and understand it and see how else it could be and how it's not as simple as this, and that there are other nuances which you need to be open to and don't be so rigid about it. And that kind of aspect of tea where knowledge is almost knowledge of all the exceptions to the rule, and your the wisdom is almost in the lack of actually being able to say something conclusive about what you know. And it's simply
Mhm.
the volume of experiences itself which becomes the thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let me just quickly go over my because I think I did I still didn't talk about delta FI.
Yeah, go ahead.
So
Sorry.
so um so basically the difference between gamma FI and delta FI is that gamma FI they're both trying to judge a person's character or see what the person is like, not judging really, because I really see gamma FI as the one that judges, but they're
Yes.
trying they're
Yes.
trying to, yeah, some people might not agree with that, but Um, so they're both trying to see how this person is. So you can see the person as having like a life like a timeline,
Mm,
like past to future. Okay, so if you're looking at what the person's already done, that basically that's gamma fi. That you see like he did this, she did this, that means they're this way. Sometimes they won't even say it, they'll just point to what the person did. But and so that's about actuality, that's SE, and I'll get to the skew blockings later. But basically delta fi is about seeing what they will be or could be in the future. So I think that's one way to look at the distinction. But yeah, delta fi in itself is I mean, maybe I could, characterize it in more of a holistic way later on. But yeah, like you were asking about um, TENE. Uh, Zoom is saying something. Okay. Uh, well, yeah, I mean, yeah, okay. So questionable, decisive. I mean, I'm not. I think it's a good idea. But I guess I would have to think more about how it relates to each of
sure,
the
sure.
the individual elements. So I'll definitely think about that at some point. But yeah, extrovert logic and extrovert intuition. I would say so those are the ones that are like trying to expand information. I did come up with a model where basically, so you can in alpha, for example, okay, you're sort of removing constraints, okay? So you're looking at a more general situation. And you see alphas, doing this a lot, sort of like trying to not think about the situation itself, but removing some assumption or constraint that's been placed, but is it's probably going to change soon, or it's not like it's sort of accidental. So that's the alpha version, which is like NE plus TI. And I'm talking about the blockings with logical elements now, just to be clear. So, but any with TE would be something more like, going to like talking about the weather in Mexico. Okay, like the weather here is like you're normally thinking about the weather like
Mm,
where you are, but you can also apply the same. You can like add a new predicate to a different object. So it's like, when you're adding a predicate to an object, you're saying you're like adding detail, which is I think it's kind of related to what you were saying, which is it's about
yes, yes.
the detail of the situation. So I guess yeah, I think that kind of meshes.
And I think it's definitely that emphasis on the exceptions. And that there are always exceptions. There's always, okay, you have this conclusion, but what about in this situation? And what about in this? And by doing so, you're opening someone up to an appreciation of new situations, which are, yeah, which don't easily fit into their very conclusive model. Thinking about what you said about Alpha NE there, I do think that there's something there in terms of removing of it's barriers. It's I've tried to almost think about any less with a TI and more with the FE, and this idea that what is an alpha extrovert doing that a gamma introvert is doing the reverse of. The alpha extrovert is saying yes to stuff, yes to people, yes to ideas, and so it allows everything and everyone in, and then chaos happens. Um, and the gamma and I saying, no, don't let these things in. That's really stupid. Don't let these bad people in. I don't know them from Adam. I don't know what they're going to do. Are they going to steal my children's candy? The alpha and he's like, no, you know what? They could be nice people, so we should let them in. And it's that kind of that difficulty when I speak to when I speak to female ILEs, for instance, they have. such a difficulty in sexual relations because they struggle to say no. They really feel it's difficult to say, they feel they need a good reason to say no. And that puts them in very difficult situations with men whom they don't want to actually have that sort of relationship with, but they feel as though they need some kind of reason not to. And also in a more modern world where, almost it feels almost a bit like Brave New World where you're meant to, engage in carnal relations with someone just because they want it. Doesn't it's that sort of that sort of Aldous Huxley outcome. It's not quite as bad as that now, but in this sort of sex positive environment, a lot of ILEs are deprived of, the faith-based reason to say no, these are not the rules I follow. And so they have to go towards their personal attitudes of, I don't feel comfortable around this person. I don't like this person. And the ILE struggles very much to do that. And it's more difficult for women than for men. I think men, they just, they probably don't end up in situations that much anyway. But, it's, yeah, the saying no is very difficult in the same way as I think the saying yes to things is very difficult for an ILI or even an ESI.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so I guess yeah, I could try to think more about how I see Delta as a whole is basically it's this end state, like I was saying, it's the most complexity, it's kind of the most inclusive, even though alpha is more about inclusion, but it's well, not include. It's not the most inclusive because it's if you want to talk about like sort of societal progression or something like that, gamma kind of has to eliminate the stuff before you get to the stable delta
Mm,
state. I suppose, but it's this end state of stability basically, and yeah, I think that's how I would see it basically. And how is
mm,
that related to, I mean, it's sort of related to having, yeah, less definite conclusions about things, I guess. I don't know. I'm not sure how that's related.
I think I
Yeah, I
think
guess I
that
guess
there's
it's just from
something
the
there. Go on, sorry, Ibrahim, I
Mhm.
interrupted you.
That's fine. So I guess it just comes from the fact that, people have a lot of different beliefs and thoughts about things and but people all coexist in the same world. So
And I think there's something there. The time of the heat death of the universe is ultimate stability because there's no more. We've reached maximal entropy at that point, and I think that does tie, I think, to deltas in terms of stability. I'm not sure that that's how the delta sees it. And I say that because when speaking to deltas, I often get the sense of them that, okay, I can feel there's stagnancy here, and I do not want the stagnancy. I have to be a learning, growing, developing, improving person in all respects. I still have to flourish, but I think there's something here in terms of in the ever learning and the growing, working on oneself to be, to always be have humility in terms of what can I do to be better? What can I do to learn more? How can I not get to the point where I know everything and then actually start impacting on my world because I know better than others? And I think there's something there about that creates stability. The instability within the self in terms of the richness of one's inner world of development leads to a lack of impact on the outer world, except in the terms of doing things of immediately measurable practical good, which are justifiable as an extension of one's good intentions. Whereas for a beta, they don't want to change inwardly. They want to be, they want to have a sense of this is who I am, this is what I believe in, and this is how I shape the world around me with my sense of certainty and my belief in myself, my belief in my mission, my purpose, my belief in the truth, my belief in that this is the plan that is set out, and I'm going to make this the case onto the world, and that destabilizes because that creates contention. And deltas, I think, do not create contention because the contention is all within, and the sort of the clashes and the doubts and the vulnerabilities and the sense of, okay, what can I learn from this and how can I improve, and all the change is going on internally rather than externally. It's in the transformation is implicit rather than explicit, whereas I think the betas are reaching for that explicit change, and the implicit becomes fixed.
Yeah, so I partly agree and partly disagree because, like,
Sure, sure.
yeah, I agree that, yeah, I mean, deltas are more unstable or in what they believe or think, they're less, emphatic about it, and yeah, that means, less trying to convey their certainty to other people. So I agree in that regard, but I think also you're kind of appealing to this idea of deltas as the self-development quadrant, which you've talked about before. And
Yeah.
I don't totally agree with that because I do think self-development is kind of an often uncomfortable and strenuous process. And I think honestly, if I was going to pick a quadrant to be about self-development, I would say it's probably gamma, because um, I mean, well, first of all, I do think betas definitely are more about striving towards, difficult goals than deltas are, which can often make them more interested in self-development. I see deltas are interested in more in acquiring specific skills, I would say. That's, yeah, I think I see that as related to any, I think ILEs are often, very they can be like super obsessed with being the best in the world at like this one game or something like that, and sort of whatever interest is currently their thing. But I don't think self-development in the kind of like really deep change is necessarily a delta thing.
I see. Okay, when I think of gammas and development, I'm thinking of, okay, knowledge is power. My ability to achieve my goals rests on what I'm able to learn of relevance. And relevance is a big thing. I think that's the introvert intuition, giving that sense to and directing the TE. It is what is relevant information towards the goals which I want to achieve. And I will have more of a material impact in terms of how I be able to achieve this myself if I direct my learning and my development towards what is relevant. Whereas when I think of deltas, the development is more a sense of implicit, so intrinsic flourishing. And when I've spoken to deltas, they feel almost, at least from talking to them, that a sense of that their discomfort is in the sense that they're not growing, that they're not developing, that they're not grappling with all the complexities and difficulties of self. Whereas if I'm talking to an alpha, I see more sense. Okay, yeah, this contrast, this complexity, it's it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable that these things are contradicting and not sort of coming together and making sense, and the boxes aren't ticked and the symmetry is being disrupted. But I don't think when it comes to deltas, they worry about the symmetry being disrupted. I think it's a sense of, okay, I like to work on myself. I feel that's good for me. I feel it's good that I go through this change, and I whether it's in terms of health or in terms of learning new opinions and understanding a new perspective that's totally different to mine, and so I can grow. And a sense of growth as being not one of a conflict or confrontation, but one of the fresh flowingness of new information preventing stagnancy. And I think it's this idea of introvert sensation. We can look at it in terms. This is why I wonder about stability. I think there's something about introverted sensation where introverted sensation. How is introverted sensation questionable rather than conclusive? I brought in this idea of questionable and conclusive. right? Any that kind of makes sense. We're not okay not scrutinizing that as much, right? But when it comes to SI, why is SI questionable rather than conclusive? Even when I speak to my wife, who I think is I comfortably say is an SEI, um, for her, she doesn't like things being really set. She likes the idea that she can be in that moment and feel it for what it is, and maybe do it slightly differently, and add a bit, do something differently here, and make sure that a still golden mean is still followed, but there's no sense of absoluteness and rigidity in it. And I think there's that sense of flowingness, and this for Alpha SI, the idea of bringing different parts together and unifying it, of integrating into a wholesome whole. But equally, when it comes to something like Delta SI, which I think is the most questionable aspect of SI, it is that sense of, okay, this is messy. This is my acceptance of my messiness in myself. I'm going to let my beer belly hang out. I'm going to, okay, I have sex with cars. That sort of strange person who, the SLI figure who has that weird sort of fetish. But that sort of just, and I'm not worried that you think about that of me because that's at least authentic about me. Someone's going to clip that and say, to think that's actually me saying that about myself. I mean, a guy in a documentary. But the point is, it's that sort of total schlubby messiness and total sincerity and authenticity and being okay with it. That's what it is. But I'm not perfect. And I'm going to try and be a better person at the end of the day. And that's okay. And I don't need to worry about, okay, what weakness that puts me in relative to someone else, and what competition, and what threats there are, and what advantages I can take. Look, this is a space where I can say I'm here to I've made mistakes. I seek forgiveness and I seek to learn and seek to be better. And I think it's that is it's not comfortable. It isn't comfortable, but I think we've often said that comfortable is more the realm of alpha SI than it is the realm of delta SI. And I remember speaking to people who we both there's a fellow called Yusuf back in the day. We both knew who Yusuf was. He was an SLI, and he said, and he's exactly, he took issue with the idea of SI as suggesting some kind of stagnancy. This was an SLI. I think SLIs can
Okay.
get caught up in the stagnancy though. Go on.
Yeah, that's a lot to
Sorry, sorry,
comment on.
sorry.
So,
Especially the sex with cars. I apologize.
no, I don't think I have anything to say about that, but
Don't worry.
I'm not familiar with that.
Don't worry. It's a weird doc. It's
Okay.
about the guy who has sex with cars. It's just a documentary on YouTube.
Okay.
Doesn't matter.
So
Okay.
so you were saying Delta as being oriented towards growth and learn. I mean, I would say yes. Okay, deltas want to learn.
Yeah.
That's how I would put it. I'm not. I don't. It's like I can't really say much without having common places of reference. I don't know who you've typed as deltas. Maybe they
Sure.
would
Sure.
be people I would not type as deltas. So
I remember a guy in the
um,
community we both knew.
well,
It's ages ago. But go on. Go on. Sorry.
okay, so. Yeah, yeah, I think that's how, yeah, I would say it's more about learning. I mean, it could be about growth, I guess, but yeah, I do think SLIs definitely are kind of just stagnant. Like, yeah, maybe they have some underlying desire, to use, NE and TE to sort of grow, but yeah, I think they're basically comfortable not doing anything if there's no problem that arises. That's my experience with SLIs in my life. They're just, pretty chill people and yeah, I think yeah, what else were you talking about? It was about yeah, how SI is questionable and I think those are the main points. Yeah.
No, fair. I would say to that point, I think that stagnancy, and I agree it is there in SLIs, but not
Mhm.
always in SLIs. I've met some who aren't like that, but maybe we disagree on their typing. But I think that's a result of the absence of any to bring in
Hmm.
new possibilities. And I think the SLI really does not like the stagnancy part of it. It's the yeah, I know I end up in this mess. I do not like it. So I say it's not. I wouldn't say it's implicit to SI and the values of SI, but I think it is a result of SI within the absence of any. And I think it strikes me that if we're going to try and talk about Delta SI, we can't think of Delta SI in the without the parts in which it's helped by the other elements. In the same way that an LSI, can be an LSI can be very stagnant as well, and they won't mind that. They won't mind being the same person year in year out. And they'll almost embrace that stagnancy as consistency. So yeah,
Sure. Yeah, and also you were mentioning like your wife being like flexible as yeah, it was as evidence of, SI being like a questionable element.
mm,
But I mean that I mean it's good that you're looking at examples, but this is where, looking at
yeah,
types can be sort of misleading sometimes because,
yeah.
she also values any. So it's like, if she's being flexible about how to do things, is that really SI or is it the any saying like, okay, this possibility is okay too? Theoretically, I would say that is, yeah, more about any.
Well, but also this is a question of the cart and the horse because okay, you could say what comes first, the element or the dichotomies we use to build the element, and you could say
Mm,
okay, by merit of the fact that you cannot value any without also valuing SI, there must be the thing which both have in common, which I think is that sense of questionability. I think there is an inherent sense and it manifests more in introvert sensation than extrovert intuition in terms of the arrogance of thinking you have it all settled and the inability to actually bring about either a harmony in the social aspect of sort of an alpha or the flow of process of a delta ST without the ability to, okay, read what's going on right here. What is the comfort level? What are the details? Or read the details of the process, tinker with it, and work out how it's working in that moment. And I think the idea of tinkering with things, and I got to go and I got to experience it for myself in terms of in its locality, and from that I can get a an embodied sense of what it is and how it's running. And I can then make my tweaks here, I can make my tweaks there. There's nothing absolute. It's not I have to completely cut it up and build it up from scratch. It's more a sense of I'm getting a sense of what this amorphous sensory embodied whole is that I can then improve and I can then bring into some sort of flow or balance or, as you say, equilibrium. And I think there's a questionable aspect to it. It is that there's no certainty of any placement in it. It is the overall experience, whatever that is, and it's holistic to some degree. There isn't it isn't the case that okay, if you do this thing, that's going to disrupt the mood, or that's going to disrupt the flow, or the atmosphere in the moment. But within a certain context, yes, it's going to disrupt how things are. It's going to completely clog things up. And I think there's a sense that when it comes to introverted sensation, how you are in that moment can create a certain amount of variance in terms of what is okay and what is not okay. What does create intensity and disrupt flow, and what doesn't. I think it's that sense of an attachment to locality which holds the questionable aspect. I'm trying to think how I can make that clearer because I perhaps haven't thought about this as much as I should have.
yeah, I'm not really sure what you
No,
were trying to say with all of that, but I like the word tweaks for, I think you were relating it to Delta. Is that right?
yes, it
Yeah,
tweaks, there's a tolerance. There's an aspect of tolerance which I think
mhm.
very much is part of introverted sensation. tolerance, um, tolerance, growth, and a sense that things aren't permanently settled. That, yes, okay, here's an example, right? You are tired. You really want to sit down. Okay, when are you going to sit down for all eternity? Are you going to say, right, I'm sitting down? And no. So at some point, you're going to get restless and want to get up and go for a walk. You're going to breathe the fresh air. And I think it's that sense of introverted sensation. It it doesn't reach a conclusive. It's more the this is how I feel at this moment, and later I might feel a different way. And that's okay. And I think that in within that is the questionable aspect of it. It's not tied down. It's not made absolute. It's not rigid. And I say that's a set that sense for both SLIs and also for SEIs. I think, but I say that the SEI places more the emphasis on the communion aspect, the coming together, the harmony side. The SLI is less about the harmony. I think more about okay, I don't want to be stagnant. I need to maintain my homeostasis by actually doing different things. And actually, when I feel this way, I'm doing this, and when I feel that way, I'm doing that. And if I need a bit more information and then a bit more activity, I'm going to go and do some good hard work for a couple of days or whatever it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, I kind of talked about that before,
Yeah,
but
you
you
did.
you wrote you raised the question of, which comes first, like the
Mm,
dichotomy, the trait or the thing, the I am element. And this is an interesting question because, I think we've talked about it before. This was probably many years ago, so maybe you don't remember. But basically, I don't really like I don't really see the things which are, in this case, the I am elements as being, I don't see them as being composed of their dichotomous traits. That I don't think that approach
mm,
works. I think it's sort of like the Reinin dichotomy uh method, you could say. It's sort of a dead end theoretically, because you can try to talk about how different dichotomous traits come together and make these elements, but really it's if you think about it, the object you're describing, if it really is like a thing, and not just like, some combination of things, like, and that's how we usually think about the IMEs and the types
mm.
and the
Elements.
yeah, and even the functions. So the if it is a thing, then the thing is coming before whatever you try to describe it in terms of. These are, the dichotomies, the traits are abstract, they're abstractions. So really, this
Mm,
is but the question then becomes, how do you explain this variety of IMEs? Like, how do they come into being? And that's where sort of the
mm.
quadrant progression comes in. It's this emanationist framework that I'm trying to use to explain how the complexity results. So
I think it's a very good point about I am elements being elemental. I mean, sure, even atoms have quarks, but and well, and the protons and neutrons, but still, it was still meant to be the indivisible. And I think there is value in seeing it that way, that an element is its own complex entity, and that is the thing exists. It's not just built out of dichotomies. But I'd also say that there is great value in the dichotomies in that they allow us to either minimalistically with three or exhaustively with seven describe all the ways in which they can compare and contrast each of the other information metabolism elements. And in doing that and in engaging in that exercise, it familiarizes ourselves with the perimeters of the element that we're describing.
I guess so. Like in theory, it could do that. It's just in my experience, like, talking about TI as, external statics of fields, or even,
Yeah,
in terms
yeah.
of other dichotomies that are maybe like, you wanted to call it external what's the other one? Abstract, external abstract introversion. If you know, that's sort of more a more reasonable way of describing it in terms of traits. But yeah, I just don't think that that approach has been very enlightening for me.
Yeah, I think it got both very technical and arcane the way that it was
Yeah.
first set out. I think there is I think there is something to it. I when I think about aspectonics, I, I've also been thinking a lot about this. I think that first of all we have to think about content, and then we have to think about okay, once you get past the content, which I think if there is something which exists without a subjective part, it's probably the content, with the domain, the intuition, the ethics, the sensation, the logic. That the idea that information is first of all either, and I think when it comes to rational or irrational, it's about prescriptive versus descriptive information. It either is describing is, could be, will be, may have been, versus should be, ought to be, which I think if we were to connect things up in a circle, you need a sense of ought to drive yourself from the potential to the actual. It kind of fits quite nicely in a ring in terms of the idea that prescriptive exists between the two poles of descriptive and vice versa. But I think that you also very much need what was called external internal. I think is more accurately called explicit versus implicit and detached involved to really understand these content based phenomena of sensation, ethics, logic, and intuition. And I think, yeah, that is that those things are, I think, the real aspects. But then, how do you get from that to eight? And I think this is when the subject, in engaging with the information, however it's presented to us, whether from within us, from within our mind's eye, or from the real practical world, if it's explicit versus implicit, I think that's where we impart something to it, such as the I wouldn't say it's not a choice. It's less conscious than a choice, but the tendency to or disposition to see things in a static way versus a dynamic way, to see things in terms of an expansive way versus a refining way, and I think that's when you can get to seeing two people seeing two very different things when looking at the same thing. If we look at the human body and we can view the sensation and logic of an organism, of a human organism, in terms of statics, in terms of okay, the phenotypes we see, the degree to which they are extended in space, their strength, their mass, whatever it is, that is ordained by their genetic code. If you change the genetic code, well, the nature of their extension and other qualities that you can directly perceive will change. That's the statics. But at the very same time, and with the very same organism, you will also find the dynamics at play, the homeostatic processes from a continuous process of evolution, of development, of refinement, gradually improving, becoming better at surviving in different locales and conditions. And that would be every bit as true as the way of viewing it statically, which leads me to think, okay, maybe this is where differences in types can be differences in quadras can be seen. I mean, differences in types in terms of your ability to process these different kinds of information, and the idea you can test someone's strength, someone's capability by giving them a real task, and you can measure how well they do in that task. But when it comes to measuring someone's personality, usually it's a self-assessed questionnaire. You're just asking them for their opinions, and becomes far more fuzzy. You can't reduce it to a number so easily. And I think it's that area you see the statics and the dynamics when you see the when you impart your values, when you see it in a questionable way or a conclusive way, etc., etc. There is that subjective aspect to the aspects, which becomes which becomes different in nature to this idea of it existing totally independently from us.
Okay, so I mean, I agree with some things there. Like I think, yeah, explicit, implicit sounds good for external and internal. I mean, it's
Mm.
sort of the same idea, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, and yeah, I do agree that yeah, there's the domains are sort of are like more primitive than the elements themselves, you know. But when you talk about like rational, irrational as prescriptive, descriptive, I don't really agree with that because,
Mm.
you know, I actually had a very similar conversation about this with someone on social media the other day, and then you know they were saying like, oh, it's you know it's kind of like judging, perceiving, you know, something like that. I think actually it was on Twitter. You might be able to see it publicly. And I was saying like, you know, really, if you're talking about like, you know, prescription or saying something is like is good is better than something else like that's more like SENI to me than judging perceiving or I than irrational I would say like and if you're talking about going from what is actual to what is potential then that's SE because it's action it's what realizes the state that is not real yet so the
Mm.
basic framework I have is that you know you have the present state of reality you know this is we whatever we can see or you know experience what we're experiencing right now is like you could say it's all of reality you know but we know it's not and there's we also have you know in our minds you know some idea of how of other ways that reality could be and so from there you know you have the actual and the potential and then you have you know action in time you have changes that can occur in time to transform one into the other and back
Mm.
and forth right so that's sort of how I that's my preferred way of like deriving the I am elements I think that those are the primitive concepts we need to work with like states processes um
Mm.
and eventually, you know, we can talk about like information metabolism, which means like generating some information in the psyche, and so you know there were I talked with Trey about you know these I made this like this diagram. Actually, I still have it here. You know, these so there's the
Yes.
aspects at the bottom, and then you know there's the
EMEs,
EMEs
NIMEs,
and
yeah.
IMEs, the energy metabolism elements and information
Yep.
metabolism elements.
Yep.
And then my conjecture is that they kind of come together in the quadra elements in Model A too. So yeah.
It's an interesting. I mean, I've wondered if. I mean, I've been thinking about energy as well, and I think it already fits into Model A. I think it's the specifically the triad of elements of um, bold, cautious, strong, weak, and evaluatory, situational. I think it's the idea that and, you know I'm when Bukalov talked about 4D and globality, I thought, well, there's not much substance behind that. It's a very vague idea. But it seemed, okay, yeah, I like the idea that between 2D and 3D, there's the ability to apply this information to new situations, to unfamiliar situations. And that as a result, there is when you're strong at information, you use the energy you're given to it appropriately to each situation, in other words, efficiently. Then there's a question of, okay, what about the allocation of energy? And I think this is when we see differences in energy, it's mostly to do with extroverts and introverts. Okay, what does that mean? I think that bold extroverts, of course, have extroverted elements as bold functions. So I think they have a high energy allocation towards extroverted elements, and the introverts have a high energy allocation towards the introverted elements. So you've now got energy allocation, And then you've got the efficiency with which you use the energy towards the metabolism of that information. Then, okay, what's the third one? What completes the triad? Constant, well, evaluatory situational. I've renamed a constant variable. And the idea being there that if it's 4D, what does it do? It stays on. It stays in activation because it has a high energy allocation, and also it's very efficient in the metabolism of information with that energy. I think that when it comes to 1D, likewise, it's constant because it has a low energy allocation and it's very inefficient with how it utilizes the energy towards metabolism. Therefore, it doesn't really even get started. So that makes sense as something which is all constantly on deactivated, or becomes almost a cry for help or a blind spot. Then I think, okay, it's the ones in the middle, which are the situational ones, or I call the variable ones, which go between states of activation and deactivation. Either because in the 2D function, they've had a high energy allocation and they've misused the energy, they've overheated, they've had it backfire, they've misapplied themselves, they've been too rigid because they're relying on normativity as opposed to situationality, as Buklov would call it. And so it then deactivates, they lose confidence in this area, they back off from it, which I think happens with the mobilizing function in the retreat to the demonstrative. Or it's just a reluctant, I need to do this thing because it's demanded of me by either the practicalities of the situation or the social expectations, which I think is what you find with the role function. Then with the 2D, sorry, 3D functions, where these are very effectively and skillfully used, so they're very efficient in how the energy is metabolized. So how energy is acquired, is used towards information metabolism. But as a result, it's very streamlined. And once it's no longer needed, it kind of deactivates. I see that very explicitly for ignoring function, where it's basically off most of the time, unless very much needed by the demands of a leading function. Or in the case of a creative function, it 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 streamlines solutions towards the needs of the leading function. Does that very well, but actually doesn't draw anywhere near the same amount of attention to itself as a leading and mobilizing do.
Well, again, it's like I agree partly. So I agree that, boldness is about having like higher energy. That makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
But I think I would relate energy more to the valuing dichotomy than the strength dichotomy, because strength to me is more about, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems more about like perceiving, the information itself. It's about input. So and values are more about what you want to see. So it's like what you're going towards, and it's about your output, your actions and how you affect the world. So it
Yep.
seems like what was it? Energy should be more about what you're, actually doing and how you're changing the world. And that's how my definitions of the
Mm.
EMEs kind of they're starting to suggest a new way of looking at intertype like conflict, basically. Because I haven't really written this up yet, but I mentioned on Twitter that SE conflicts with itself. And I think this is a really I
Yeah.
think this is a good idea.
Yeah.
It's something, we've talked about, SE types conflicting with each other, but
Yes.
it kind of leads to that logical conclusion that SE, you can go in this direction or you can go in that direction. And if two people want to go in opposite directions, they're gonna clash. So
But
yeah.
this is where I say this is why bold cautious exists in a triad, another triad
Mm,
with valued subdued and stubborn flexible.
mhm,
And this is why I think the leading and mobilizing functions, I call them the assertive functions. I call the ignoring and the vulnerable functions the intransigent functions. They're just that I don't want anything to do with this. You won't draw me into this. The the creative and the which one again? Oh yeah, the suggestive. They're the collaborative functions. Whether that is, although people think I'm very set in my logic, those from other socionists say I'm not very set in my logic, almost too flexible in my opinions. It's sort of that. It's fine. I get criticized for one, which I think is actually more true from the socionists, whereas people who don't know me because who don't know me in that atmosphere around other socionists with similar levels of knowledge, they just think I'm very, very stubborn because I don't change my view very much when they are disputing me because I know more than them. But I'd say I am actually quite flexible in my logic compared to you, compared to Rowan, etc. And even Peter. And when it comes to the suggestive function, I think it's very much okay. I need your input here because I do not know even where to begin. And so again, it's collaborative. Um, then when it comes to the which one was it again? Oh yeah, the demonstrative and the role I call the more reluctant, where okay, I don't value this, but I'm flexible in it, and I end up doing it a lot more because of that. And if I'm receptive to demands, even though I don't like it, my role function will kick into gear. And the demonstrator function is constantly doing stuff in the background, even though I don't care enough for it to actually do it for its own sake. And I don't like to draw much attention to it, but I'm still doing it a lot. And I think that's where it connects very well. But especially SLEs will conflict with other SLEs. I was talking about this in my course about why stub and flexible is also very important for understanding intertype relationships. In that, when you have the same values, but you're also stubborn in the same areas, although you won't clash per se, you won't be at loggerheads because you can't agree on terms of reconcile your differences in values. You have the same values, you'll nonetheless compete rather than complement. So two SLEs, this town ain't big enough for the both of us situation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. Like I think I might have noted it in my article is that there can only be one boss.
Yeah.
So two SLEs if they want to be boss in the same kind of domain, they're going to clash.
I've seen it in other places as well. I've seen EIEs hate it
Yeah,
when ESCs show up to a party because suddenly they can no longer manage the emotional environment the way they want to. Because the ESC, at least it has the advantage in terms of the immediacy of that particular party. And go on.
yeah, or EIEs with other EIEs. Like I've
Yes,
noticed,
also,
like
yes.
I've not like they haven't said it explicitly, but I've noticed this pattern where EIEs really dislike being on other people's Discord servers. They just and I the way I see it is that they just want to be the ones in who are the boss. They want to say what's allowed and what's not allowed. That's how I see it.
I think it is a contrarian tendency that contrarians, I think, want to set the mores of their social spaces. I knew that I did not. Okay, I went from being an internet troll on other people's forums. I went from being basically chaotic evil on other people's forums to being kind of lawful good on World Socionic Society because I realized, okay, now I can actually create this and imbue this with the mores which I want. And it's now on my terms, and there's no one, I'm not competing with anyone in terms of that. And I think that this is I think types which are mobilizing and leading in extroverted ethics have that tendency. That's why I think I honestly think that if I think of one thing which people need to be talking more about, is probably who we aren't talking about much at the moment is stubborn flexible, next to valued subdued, next to strong weak. It's very good for understanding why people clash, even if they share or compete if they share the same values, and why mirrors don't have those same issues.
Yeah, in general, yeah, probably not.
I also think I don't know. I actually don't have any other. Trying to be any other ILEs. in my space. I don't think there are. No, in sort of diagnostics, there weren't any very prominent ILEs. Certainly not in the moment. It's I'm not. I don't tend to be in a situation where I have other ILEs around me. Typically, what ends up happening is that I have a friend who's an ILE. I get on well with them, but they do their thing and I do my thing because I find that we'll just end up competing over doing the same thing. I think it applies across the board in different ways, less about clashing and the fighting because that's not really relevant outside of extroverted sensation. But I think it does need its own sort of competition in each case. People want to be able to be the one to play their role in line with their assertive functions.
Yeah, I think yeah, in real life I don't think I've had any notable conflicts with other LIIs, but yeah, online
Mm.
occasionally, yeah, if we're talking about socionics, maybe we might get into an argument and have, our differences about, how to view the theory or something like that. But yeah, I think mostly we just try to, do our own thing.
I think there's there would be the vectors would be being an obstinate type. So yeah, definitely over the logical side. But I wonder, okay, where you are in Senegal, if you have invested at all in what is it, stability, the comfort of your space, the symmetry of your space, and whether that exacting side of an LII would come out. The need for things to be in a certain way, and when it gets thrown off kilter, suddenly you can't sleep. You can't do the things which you really, really need to do. And I'm wondering if that, if an LII would have also need that, but be wired a bit differently and need their bed this way, positioned at this angle to the sunlight and all the rest. If that could lead to sort of competing in the same space.
Yeah, yeah, I would say I'm I'm definitely stubborn about, my living space and,
Yes.
comfort, things like that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's true. Also,
I've noticed it also. I don't have it at all. People can enter my
uh,
physical space, they can sit on my lap. I don't mind. I do not care about I do not mind my physical space. I'd rather someone else look after that for me and make it really nice for me. If it gets actually painful, sure, but it has to actually get painful. I don't need it to be on my own terms, is the point. I give that to my wife to do. But I noticed with EIEs and LIEs, they are again exacting. They need, even though they don't value introverted sensation, I've had EIEs scream at me for coughing too much in their vicinity because the
wow.
noise is bugging them. And and other sorts of needs for or fretting over particular details. It needs to go this way. It's so annoying I have to deal with these details at all, but I just need it to be this way so that other things which I care more about don't fall by the wayside. And even if we talk about someone like Donald Trump, who regards people think is an SLE or an SEE, almost everyone in the socionics community at least thinks he's extrovert sensation leading. He again is exacting. He is very particular over who shakes his hand. He really takes issue with things like double dipping. He and his sort of particularities again need to be on his whatever's in his space needs to be on his terms and not on anyone else's terms. And this is what I really I think I've come onto something with this. Out of everything, it excites me the most in terms of applicability and people seeing how it can actually be useful.
I mean, yeah, it's like, yeah, we can make those observations post hoc, having typed these people, but I guess I'm just not convinced that it's like a good thing to look at while typing people. Well, possibly. I need to see more examples of it. But I can imagine there might be some cases where I might disagree with you.
Yeah, sure. I know when I first started thinking about it, I was thinking, okay, this is the sort of thing which makes people nod when I tell them about it after I know their type. Like I made you nod and smile when I told you about your living condition. Even though I've never lived with you because you live in Senegal and we've never been in the same room physically. Whereas I've been in the same room as Rita physically, Peter physically, other people. I still was able to determine that about you, even though we've never discussed it. But even so, I was thinking at the time, okay, how would I actually use this to type people? Is this the most salient thing for type people? I'm noticing it more, but again, it is limited by context. I do I have started to think about it in terms of people's answers to questions, and I am thinking, okay, are you someone who needs whatever's going on in your space to be on your terms, or are you someone who needs the scope of possibility to be on your terms? And versus, are you someone who is actually whether because you just want to blend in or because you feel you have to, you actually are socially adaptive and adjust to other people's mores, or if you're someone who is actually quite intellectually adaptive and you can easily take on and bolt on other people's reasonings and adapt your thinking towards that, or just allow someone else to almost decide how you're thinking about it.
Yeah, like okay, I mean we can't agree like okay, mobilizing SI is probably going to be, fussy about details, but then when you say like okay, EIEs are also that way, it's like,
Mm.
is that because they have stubborn sensing or is like isn't an LSI going to also be like that? Like come on.
That's the thing. When I speak to LSI, yes, they're very good at maintaining their spaces. Yes, they do create a sense of order, but they also, and this is the thing, they don't need the particularities of their physical circumstances to be on their terms. And they blend the sense of, okay, I will create the discipline. I will definitely set the rules are not going to change. But if I'm in a more intense situation or a more relaxed situation, I will adapt in terms of my pace of life and what I need to do. The LSI who goes into or an ESI who goes into a mode of battle or fighting in history versus retiring then and being on the farm and going between those two states. It suggests I'm very good at this area. It's an area of I call it mastery. I can handle it. I can make my space where I want it. I can create. I can look after my homeostasis, but I can also be intense whenever I need to be as well. But I think they are okay with the circumstances deciding that rather than it needing to necessarily be on their terms. Whereas their sense of what is true and what is not has to absolutely be on their terms, but also what outcomes they're going to pursue and think of as being possible. I think that also needs something which they have to have on their terms.
Well, yeah, like that. I mean, that makes sense for the particular example. I mean, the example to some extent,
Mm.
but it's sort of like you're changing the definition for different types, so it's not really uniform. And I do think LSIs are very stubborn about their physical and environment. They can be, yeah, sort of very critical about that.
I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think of examples. I've struggled to see examples. I do think that LSIs think and ESIs think a lot about their physical conditions. I think that they assess a lot of other things through their awareness of their physical conditions. But I say, as well as that, they also adapt to situations of intensity which throw off those conditions entirely. And I think that's the point. And LII will almost not be able to, will not feel safe in their space and have to just detach from their circumstances when the physical locale is not the way which is suitable to them for them to then invest themselves in presentness. But an LSI, I think that they can go with the rough and the smooth, and an LSE and an ESC can also go with the rough and the smooth far effectively, even though the LSI and the ESI will be very much inclined to, as it is a demonstrative function, see this thing as something they're very aware of. They're reading all sorts of other things through it because they know it and they understand it implicitly, but I don't think they take it seriously in and of itself. And that I think that shows when it goes from just habitually keeping things in a certain state of order and stability to then, okay, we now need to go and fight for something that's important. and that stability just goes because it's not actually the thing they need to have on their own terms. It is the cause, and it is the sense of what is true. I'm seeing some agreement in there from you. I mean, you're
Uh,
half agreeing and you're half like, I'm not sure about this yet.
yeah, yeah, it's just like whenever I hear like a new idea about socionics, I just it has to be
I know.
really clear to me, for it to be something I'm going to add into my, uh, toolkit or whatever you call it, or, or just say that that's definitely right. Because, even the
Yeah.
rain and dichotomies, you can say, oh, yeah, they kind of make sense. They kind of work in these examples. But then if you look more closely, then,
No, I've had for me to feel at peace with them, I've had to redefine most of them.
okay, yeah,
Some of them are wild, some of them I'm very excited about asking, declaring. But yeah, I think that might create more groans than not at this stage, especially as I've already thrown a lot of stuff at you. I'm just looking at what Jared has said. My LSI dad's extreme picky about his SI environment. EIEs are blind to it. I would say ESCs, so EIEs are not aware of the flow and the harmony in their environment. It is still a vulnerable function. But I was saying there's to the extent of which they are aware of things which are physically concrete, they'll need it to be on their terms. And they won't allow other people to take charge of that instead. The EIEs who get so caught up with feelings of illness and hypochondria and thinking that their body is acting against them and that fixation on it again an idea of being exacting without any kind of strength. It's when it's stubborn and it's weak. I think it's very much a place of brittleness. So it does. It's important to if we're talking about these dichotomies, not thinking about how an EIE processes introvert sensation versus say an SEI processes introvert sensation. There's a likeness, a similarity in the stubbornness, but the other dichotomies have to be considered alongside that. But yeah,
okay. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about other than stubborn
I mean,
personality?
I feel that going into asking and declaring is going to be perhaps a bit much for today.
Okay.
Um, is there anything you like else you'd like to talk about?
Um, no, that's about it. I basically went over the outline of my research with Trey before I
Mm.
just thought maybe there were certain aspects that you might be more interested in. So yeah, I think that's a good place to stop. So
I think I just want to thank you for coming on here, Ibrahim. It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed talking to you and bouncing ideas off of you. I I like what you're, even though I am a 16 element skeptic, in cases such as yours and in cases such as the Kimani's, I don't necessarily think what you're proposing is incompatible with someone who's a 16 element skeptic. And I think it's simply different ways of talking about the same underlying phenomena. And in those ways, I'm far more comfortable talking about it. I think when what you describe zings for me, it's when I think it latches onto unifying, dividing, and questionable, conclusive. And without me having told you about this before, you coming to the same conclusions, or very similar conclusions, through your own independent line of inquiry. And I find that exciting. Yeah, I look forward to
yeah,
seeing what comes next.
yeah, and I guess I should say like yeah, the way I'm sort of approaching, the 16 element model is by looking at the blockings and especially the blockings within the quadra and even Rowan has talked about this too, like how, a
Mm,
16 element model should be looking at quadro blockings and yeah, I basically agree with
mm.
that. It's about
Yeah.
yeah, it's about looking at how that, for example, the LII's TI relates to the, what we would normally think of as the mobilizing SI and the creative NE and maybe even, the demonstrative NI and sort of seeing the link between the rational and irrational. So yeah, that's the approach I'm taking. And yeah, hopefully it will be more compatible with our socionic practice, Western socionics. So
All right. Well, I look forward to seeing how it develops further. In the meantime, I'm going to think about dichotomies for blocks. I know Kamani's done some really good work on that. I still need to integrate the sheer mass of what Kamani went into in our Model L discussion. More of a lecture, really, because he had a lot to impart, and I want to see what that leads to. I'm excited about that, and I'm excited to see how you take these ideas forward. Thank you, and thank you
all
to
right,
everyone
yeah.
for tuning in. Do you want to do some questions and answers? Do you want to get going?
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah. But
Any
thanks, yeah, thanks for
questions?
having me, by the way. This is it's a lot of fun to talk about this stuff. So
Any questions from people? Anything at all for Ibrahim? Let's take a look.
yeah, I
Nothing
wasn't
yet.
looking at the
I'll
chat.
wait a couple of minutes, and if nothing comes out, then we can finish.
Oh,
Um,
my eyes are brown, by the way. That was the first question.
ah, oh yeah, oh yeah. There, I saw that question. Are there any other questions further up? Let me take a look.
And yeah, somebody says Jack is extremely stubborn in his thinking. Yeah, I think, a lot of people, okay, if you know more about a subject, you're going to be, you're not going to change your mind as much about it. That's just the way it goes. And I think a lot of people make unfair accusations when they see that you disagree and you're not really going to be convinced by them in some, internet discussion. Like, I'm sorry, I'm just not going to be converted to SCS or something just by talking to you about it because I already know basically what you're going to say and it doesn't really connect with how I see the theory. So I mean, if you view that as stubborn, like, okay, maybe you can type me as LSI if you want. Have fun with that.
I just think the amount of times I've been convinced of something that someone else has said, and when I go to someone else and they think, no, you are changing your mind too quickly on this. That happens a lot in my interactions with other socionists of a similar level of experience to myself. And that's very different to when I'm interacting with someone who doesn't know anywhere near as much as I or other sociologists at that level know about that subject. So, of course, they're going to come across far more stubborn. In the same way that if you speak to a doctor about the body, it doesn't matter how open-minded they are, they're going to come across as very stubborn on matters of the body because they've put years into studying this and understanding every aspect of it. So that's why I always said the reason I unlike a lot of other I get into more debates and discussions with people on the internet than I think just about any other sociologist which I know, because even though there's usually such a large gap between what I know and the other person knows about this very particular subject, I'm still very interested in the possibility of someone changing my mind. And I can't just back down from that. I have to be exposed to the possibility of someone changing my mind. It doesn't usually work. Sometimes it does. And those times it does, I've been very pleased with myself that I went and had those conversations and did that. Whereas if I speak to someone like Peter, he's like, "Why are you bothering talking to this person?"
Yeah.
I would have switched off a conversation after the first two exchanges.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Like, I think you're by far the most likely to entertain somebody like from, OPS or whatever it is, like, and have them on
Yes,
your channel, or talk
it was.
about their ideas. I would find it boring, honestly.
But
Um,
I actually, what got me onto my approach to the quadrars and all this stuff was actually speaking to a guy in MBTI. A guy who started MBTI, who's the first person to do the introduction to socionics. Um, Hang on a second, trying to find it here. Yeah, I think it was one of the first people to do an introduction to socionics. and he was thinking so interestingly about the quadras
Was it Michael
from
Pierce?
yes, exactly, Michael Pierce. He it was brilliant. And he came at it from, an MBTI perspective, not just MBTI perspective, his own thinking, a philosopher's perspective. But that we got thinking, yes, gamma is monadic, and beta, he sort of gelled with the aristocracy of beta, and he sort of he sort of understood these aspects of clannishness on one side, monadicness on another, on aristocracy of another. I don't think he quite got Delta so much, but that's what inspired me to start really thinking about what is the nature of these quadras, and then going into the other Raynian dichotomies. And when I first developed my course, he was the first person I reached out to get to look at it, and he's not even in socionics. I mean, he did a little foray into it, but he never saw himself as a socionist. So it's those chance encounters, and those really shape how I think about things.
Yeah, so there is one question here. Do you agree with Model L that rational and irrational types have different function elements? So, yeah, I actually read this article that somebody wrote about Model L, and it was saying that basically the blockings are different between rational and irrational types. But in and so I guess my understanding is what that means is like the model is the relationships that result from that are aligned with dichotomies like Raynian dichotomies as opposed to being based on like they are in model A on the permutation of functions which leads to this D2 cross or sorry, Z2 cross D4 uh, structure, which I call, this is like the socionic group. And so basically the answer is no. They in Model A2, my understanding is that it should be the elements are just isomorphic to the types. They have the exact same structure, and
Mm,
they'll have the each so an element becomes the same as a type and a
mm,
function becomes the same as an intertype relationship. And you can also like put the four all together, but that's another story. That's called introverted socionics, where you identify the types with the relationships.
mm. Yeah, I've seen. I can't remember the guy who first brought it up to me, but mapping the intertype relationships alongside the elements, alongside the types, and almost each one is sort of the ENTP the either becomes the null hypothesis, the null dichotomy, and then everything else maps according to that. I I'm still not necessarily convinced of the practicality of it, but it does look pretty cool as
Yeah,
long as
that's
it's
so
there
that's
to be.
another one of those ideas that's like very hypothetical, kind of a stretch. I've talked with
Yeah,
identifying the dichotomies is like, I mean, it's actually something I would consider even beyond introverted socionics. It's that's an idea that was proposed by Churyumov in the East, who he died I think a few years back. But I've talked with Sergei Shanyary, who was
that's
one
the
of his
guy. That's
students.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's it. Yes.
yeah. I guess he's proposing, he has similar ideas.
Yep. Makes sense. Any other questions? All right. There don't seem to be any other questions. But Ibrahim, again, it's been delightful. And I'd love to have you on again.
Yeah, I'd love to come on the channel again. Yeah,
Great.
thanks a lot, Jack. Thanks for having
Thank
me.
you.
Everyone have a good night.
Good night, everyone. And thank you for tuning in.
Bye.